The smell of mold and rust filled every corner of the shack when Elena Carter woke that June morning. But it wasn't the smell that made her tremble. It was the deathly silence from the mattress where Sophia slept. The 4-year-old girl was no longer coughing, and that silence was worse than any sound of suffering. Elena ran to her daughter, her heart pounding. She could only breathe again when she saw the child's chest rise and fall weakly, each painful breath turning the girl's lips a deeper shade of purple. 3 days. The clinic doctor had been clear. 3 days to get the expensive antibiotics or the pneumonia would win. Elena's calloused hands trembled as she brushed her fingers against Sophia's hot forehead. The fever burned so fiercely, it seemed impossible for such a small body to endure it. Outside, the cold winter wind whistled through the gaps in the poorly fitted planks. Elena pulled their only blanket up to her daughter's chin, knowing it wasn't enough. It was never enough. The roof leaked in 3 different places, and she had already moved the mattress twice, searching for a dry spot. Her 7-month belly was heavy as she stood up, every movement a cruel reminder of the man who had abandoned her pregnant, taking not just her heart, but also the savings she kept hidden under the mattress. If this story is touching your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. It's how we continue to bring stories that remind us that God never abandons His children, even when all seems lost. Where are you listening from? Elena looked at the old sewing machine in the corner, her only tool, and felt tears burn her eyes. She had tried to sell it yesterday. She went to 5 different pawn shops, each offering less than the last. None came close to the $200 she needed for the medicine. The last shop offered $40, and the owner had the audacity to say he was being generous. $40, the price of her daughter's death sentence. She put on her torn coat, the same one she'd worn for 3 winters, and the threadbare shawl that had been her mother's, her only inheritance besides a stubborn faith in a God who seemed to have forgotten her address. She kissed Sophia's hot forehead, whispering promises she didn't know if she could keep, and stepped out into the still dark street. Mrs. Teresa, the neighbor who sometimes watched Sophia, had promised to keep an eye on her, but Elena knew the woman had her own problems and 6 mouths to feed. She couldn't ask for more. The dirt roads of the outskirts were deserted at that hour. Elena began to run, her bare feet. She had sold her shoes 2 weeks ago, slapping against the frozen ground. She had to try again. Maybe someone had woken up with a more generous heart. Maybe someone would look at her and see not an abandoned pregnant woman, but a desperate mother trying to save her child. The first door was Mr. Henderson's, the owner of the convenience store where she had a line of credit. The man opened the door in his pajamas, his face hardening when he saw her. "Eleanor, you already owe me nearly $100. I can't lend you anymore." "Mr. Henderson, for the love of God, my daughter is dying. I just need $200. I'll pay it all back, I swear on my mother's memory." The man sighed, and for a moment, Eleanor saw something like pity in his eyes. But then his wife appeared behind him, arms crossed, her mouth a thin line of disapproval. "Henderson, we've talked about this. She needs to learn to stand on her own. It's not our fault her husband ran off." The door closed with a dull thud that echoed in Elena's chest like a punch. She stood there for a moment, the cold biting at her skin before moving on to the next house. Mrs. Marlene, who ordered clothing alterations, Mr. Anthony, whom she knew from church, Mrs. Christine, for whom she'd sewn for free when the woman had no money, door after door, excuse after excuse. Some didn't even open. Others opened only to say that times were hard for everyone. One woman had the nerve to suggest Elena find the baby's father, as if she hadn't tried, as if the man hadn't moved out of state and blocked her number. The sun was beginning to rise when Elena reached the church on the square. Her legs were trembling from exhaustion and cold, and her belly felt like she was carrying stones instead of a baby. She pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped into the sacred silence of the empty temple. The smell of old incense and candles still hung in the air. She walked to the altar, each step a fight against the despair that threatened to swallow her whole. She knelt at the front pew, where the wood was worn from years of prayers, and finally allowed the tears to fall uncontrolled. They weren't silent tears. They were sobs that tore through her chest, making her whole body shake. She clutched her mother's shawl to her face, seeking comfort in the memory of a time when she wasn't so alone. "Lord," her voice came out broken, barely a hoarse whisper, "I know I have sinned. I know I haven't been to church every Sunday like I should. I know I've doubted you when things got too hard, but my daughter, my Sophia, she's not to blame for anything. She is innocent and good and doesn't deserve to pay for my mistakes." Elena lifted her face to the crucifix above the altar, tears blurring her vision. "Take me, Lord. You can take my life if you must, but spare my little girl. She's only 4. She hasn't even begun to live. Please." Her voice failed completely, turning into a silent cry. She stayed there, she didn't know how long. Maybe half an hour, maybe an eternity. When she finally managed to stand, her legs were numb and her body exhausted. She left the church with no answers, no miracles, just the crushing weight of helplessness. She was walking aimlessly when she ended up on the dirt road that led out of town. She had nowhere else to go, no one else to ask for help. The thought of going home and facing Sophia, of seeing those feverish eyes and having nothing to offer but empty words, was unbearable. So she kept walking, one foot in front of the other, as if the movement itself could postpone the inevitable. The Travers farm, a voice echoed in her memory. It was something Mrs. Teresa had mentioned days ago, when Eleanor commented on needing more work. "They say he pays well, but he's tough. A closed-off man, lives alone ever since his wife died. But fair, everyone says he's fair." Elena hadn't considered it before because the farm was miles from town and she had no way to get there. But now, with her legs already moving on their own, aimlessly, that possibility shone like a last spark of hope. Maybe he needed someone to sew. Maybe he would pay in advance. Maybe... The sun was already high when she saw the wooden gate with the name St. Helen's Farm carved into it. The irony of the name didn't escape her. Her own mother used to say that St. Helen had found the true cross and that the name carried a blessing. Elena stopped in front of the gate, her vision blurring at the edges. She had walked for miles without eating anything since yesterday morning, and her pregnant, exhausted body was demanding its price. She tried to open the gate, but her arms wouldn't obey. She tried to cry for help, but her voice wouldn't come. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was the blue sky above her and the red dirt road rushing up to meet her face. Michael Travers was on his way back from town when he saw the shape collapsed on the side of the road, just a few yards from his farm's gate. For a second, he thought it was an animal, but then he noticed the threadbare shawl moving in the wind and the unmistakable shape of a human body. He slammed the brakes of his truck, the tires skidding in the dirt. He ran to the fallen woman, his heart beating erratically. She was young, pregnant, her face pale as wax and her lips cracked from dehydration. Michael turned her over gently, checking for signs of life, and felt immense relief when she moaned softly. She was alive, but barely. He carried her to the truck with ease. She weighed less than she should, even pregnant, her prominent bones revealing months of malnutrition. He placed her in the passenger seat and was about to start the engine when she opened her eyes, disoriented and afraid. "No, no!" Elena tried to pull away, her shame greater than her fear. "I'm sorry, I needed..." "Calm down." Michael's voice was deep but gentle, a combination she didn't expect. "You fainted in front of my farm. You need help." Elena looked at him for the first time. He was a large man, broad-shouldered with calloused hands from work, but his brown eyes carried a sadness she recognized, the same sadness she saw in the mirror every day. He didn't seem threatening. He just seemed tired. The kind of tired that comes from deep inside, the kind no amount of sleep can cure. "My daughter!" The words came out in a convulsive sob she couldn't contain. "Sophia, she's at home sick, alone, waiting. I tried to get money for the medicine, but nobody... She couldn't finish, the sobs taking over completely. Something in that woman's desperation touched a wound in Michael that he thought had stopped bleeding long ago. She was the same age Anna would have been, 30-something, pregnant, vulnerable, and there was a child in danger, a real, living child who could still be saved. "Where do you live?" he asked, already starting the engine. "But you don't have to... I just came to ask if you had any sewing work." "Where do you live?" he repeated more firmly. Elena gave him the address, her voice choked with tears. Michael turned the truck around, heading away from the farm. He drove in silence, his jaw clenched as she cried softly beside him. 15 minutes later, they pulled up in front of the shack. Michael got out and followed Elena to the door. What he saw inside made his stomach turn. The place was little more than a hovel, with gaps in the walls, a packed earth floor and broken furniture. And on the only bed, a small, pale girl was struggling to breathe, each inhale a painful wheeze. It was like stepping back in time. For one terrible second, Michael didn't see Sophia. He saw the son he never knew, the baby born without breath as Anna bled to death. He felt his legs weaken, but forced himself to approach the bed. The girl opened her eyes, and even feverish and sick, she managed to smile when she saw her mother. "Mommy, you came back." "Yes, my love, Mommy's back." Elena kissed her daughter's burning forehead, trying to hide the desperation in her voice. Michael watched the scene for a moment that seemed suspended in time. A mother and daughter alone in the world, starving and freezing in a shack that barely deserved to be called a home. And right then, in that second, something inside him that had been dead for 6 years began to beat again. Not strong, not clear, but definitely alive. He made a decision he knew would change everything. "Get her dressed," he said, his voice coming out steadier than he felt. "Get whatever you need. You're both coming with me." Eleanor looked at him as if she hadn't understood the words. "What? My house has 4 empty bedrooms. My housekeeper is 68 years old and needs help. And this girl needs a doctor now." Michael turned to face her directly. "You'll work as a housekeeper, helping Mrs. Rose. In exchange, you'll have a home, food, and all the medical treatment your daughter needs. It's not charity, it's honest work." I can't accept that. People will talk, they'll say..." "Let them talk," he cut her off, and for the first time in years, something like determination shone in his eyes. "This house has been dead for too long, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that a reputation can't keep you warm on a cold night." Eleanor looked at Sophia, who was coughing weakly on the bed, then at the man in front of her. Every fiber of her pride screamed at her to refuse, to not accept what felt like disguised charity. But then, Sophia coughed again, that horrible sound that tore at a mother's heart, and Elena knew she had no choice. She didn't have the luxury of pride when her daughter's life was at stake. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" Michael was silent for a long moment, looking at Sophia. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years of unprocessed grief. "My wife died in childbirth 6 years ago. The baby, too." He paused, his throat tight. "That house, that big house, has a garden my son never saw. A room that was never used." Too much silence. He looked at Elena, his eyes finally seeming to see something beyond his own pain. "It would be an honor to have you there, not charity. An honor." Tears returned to Elena's eyes, but this time they were different. They weren't tears of despair, but of something like hope. Something she hadn't felt in so long, she almost didn't recognize it. "Okay," she whispered finally. "We accept." An hour later, Sophia was lying in a clean, soft bed in the big house at St. Helens Farm, being examined by Dr. August Mason, Michael's private doctor, who had dropped everything to attend the emergency. Elena watched from the doorway, barely believing any of it was real. The spacious room, the mold-free walls, the windows that actually closed, the warmth coming from an electric heater in the corner. "It's severe pneumonia, but it's treatable, Doctor," Mason said after examining Sophia, his experienced voice bringing some comfort. "I'll start the antibiotics today, and she needs absolute rest, but she's going to be fine. You can rest assured." Eleanor nearly collapsed to her knees in relief. Michael steadied her by the arm, firm but gentle. "See?" he said softly. "God doesn't abandon his children." But what neither of them knew in that moment, as Sophia slept, cradled by the first effects of the medicine, and Elena finally allowed her exhausted body to rest, was that back in town, in a large house downtown, Beatrice Vance had just received an urgent phone call. Her friend Lourdes, who worked at the pharmacy, had information about a certain abandoned seamstress who had just moved into the house of the region's most eligible widower. And Beatrice, who had been planning to marry her daughter Morgana off to Michael for years, was not a woman to let this go unnoticed. The news landed on Beatrice Vance's breakfast table like a bomb. Lourdes had called at 7 in the morning, her voice thick with the morbid excitement that only truly scandalous gossip could arouse. "Beatrice, you won't believe this. That Elena, the one abandoned by her husband, pregnant. She's living at Michael Travers's house with her sick daughter. He went and picked her up himself yesterday. Beatrice almost dropped her expensive porcelain teacup. She was silent for so long that Lourdes thought the call had dropped. "Beatrice? Are you there?" "I'm here." Her voice was controlled, but inside Beatrice was seething. "Thank you for the information, Lourdes. We'll talk later." She hung up the phone and stared at the dining room wall, where smiling family photos looked back at her. Morgana, at 23, beautiful, educated, the police chief's daughter. The perfect match for Michael Travers. Beatrice had been planning this union for 3 years, ever since she noticed the widower's grief was finally beginning to loosen its grip. Strategic dinners, casual encounters at church, conversations about what a good mother Morgana would be. And now, an abandoned seamstress, pregnant with another man's child, living under Michael's roof. "This will not stand," she said to the empty room, her voice low but loaded with determination. At the farm, Eleanor woke up disoriented. For a moment she didn't recognize the clean ceiling above her, the painted walls, the soft light coming through a window with real curtains. Then the memory returned. Fainting, Michael, Sophia's illness, the big house. She jumped out of bed, her heart racing, and ran to the next room where they had put her daughter. Sophia was sleeping deeply, her chest rising and falling much more easily than yesterday. Some color had returned to her face, and when Elena placed a hand on the girl's forehead, the fever had dropped considerably. The tears came before she could control them, tears of relief so intense it hurt. "The antibiotics are working," Mrs. Rose's voice came from the doorway, gentle and warm. The elderly housekeeper entered the room with a breakfast tray. Dr. Mason stopped by early. He said she's responding well to the treatment. Eleanor quickly wiped her tears, embarrassed. Thank you. Thank you for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay." "You repay it by working, Mrs." Rose smiled, and there was so much kindness in that smile that Elena felt her chest tighten. "Michael already left for the fields, but he made it clear you're not to start working until you've recovered and Sophia is better. For now, eat something. You're feeding too. You can't be starving." It was the first decent meal Elena had eaten in weeks. Fresh bread, real butter, fruit, milk. She ate slowly, each bite a reminder of everything she had lost and now inexplicably found again. The first few days were a quiet adjustment. Eleanor watched Michael from a distance, trying to understand this man who had saved her without asking for anything in return. He woke before the sun, worked in the fields with his hands, and returned at dusk covered in dirt and sweat. He always asked about Sophia, but kept a respectful distance. Sometimes Elena would catch him looking at the empty room at the end of the hall, the one intended for the son who was never born, with an expression so devastated she had to look away. Sophia improved quickly under Dr. Mason's care. Within a week she was already playing in the garden, her laughter echoing through the house in a way that made Mrs. Rose cry with joy. "This house needed this sound," the housekeeper said one day, as they watched Sophia chase butterflies among the flowers. 6 years of silence. 6 years of a living man carrying a coffin in his chest. Elena started working 2 weeks later, helping with the household chores. She cooked, cleaned, and mended torn clothes for the farmhands. She did everything with an almost desperate meticulousness, as if each completed task was a payment on her impossible debt. Michael never complained, never demanded, just offered a quiet thank you when he passed her in the hallways. It was on a rainy night that something shifted between them. Elena was in the kitchen making tea when she heard a noise from the living room. She found Michael sitting on the sofa, holding an old photograph, his broad shoulders shaking slightly. She should have turned around, given him privacy for his grief, but something made her stay. "She was beautiful," Eleanor said softly, looking at the photo of the smiling woman. "Anna," she assumed. Michael quickly wiped his face, embarrassed to be caught in a moment of weakness. "She was," his voice came out rough, "and good. Better than I deserved." Eleanor sat on the other end of the sofa, keeping her distance but offering her presence. "I know what it's like to carry guilt," she said after a long silence. "I keep wondering if I did something wrong, if I was a bad wife, if that's why he left me." "It wasn't," Michael spoke with surprising firmness. "A man who abandons his pregnant wife is no good. It has nothing to do with you." "And you?" Elena dared to ask. "What guilt do you carry?" He was silent for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. But then the words came, slow and painful. "I was the one who insisted on having a child. Anna was afraid. The doctor said the pregnancy would be high risk, but I wanted it so badly." His voice broke. "I killed her with my selfishness. I killed my son too." "Michael, no," Elena heard herself say, her voice firm. "That's not true. You loved your wife. She chose to have the baby too. It wasn't your fault." He looked at her then, really looked, and Elena saw in his eyes the same despair she felt when she looked in the mirror. Two broken hearts, trying to convince themselves they deserved to keep breathing. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you keep going after everything?" Elena looked at her own hands, calloused from so much work. "I have Sophia. When I think about giving up, I look at her and remember I have to be strong, that God gave her to me to take care of." "I don't have anyone," Michael said, and there was so much loneliness in those words that Elena's heart ached. "Yes, you do," she replied softly. "You have Mrs. Rose, you have your farmhands who respect you. You have—" She hesitated, but continued, "You have us. Sophia adores you. She waits for you to come home every day." Something passed over Michael's face then, surprise, perhaps, or cautious hope, as if the idea of being important to someone again was both wonderful and terrifying. "Elena," he began, but didn't finish. He just squeezed her hand, quickly, gratefully, before standing up and leaving the room. Elena sat there, her hand still tingling where he had touched it, her heart beating in a way that had nothing to do with fear or despair. The first Sunday Elena went to Mass with Michael was when it all began to fall apart. Mrs. Rose had convinced them it would be good for Sophia to see other children, to get some fresh air in town. Michael agreed, and the four of them went together. Michael, Elena, with her obvious 8-month belly, Sophia skipping between them, and Mrs. Rose smiling proudly. The church was full when they arrived. The buzz of conversation stopped abruptly as they walked through the door. Every head turned. The whispers started like the hum of angry bees. Elena felt Beatrice Vance's stare before she saw her. The woman was sitting in the third pew, flanked by Lords Constance and Gloria, the ladies of the Women's Auxiliary who ran the town's gossip mill like generals commanding armies. When Elena's eyes met Beatrice's, she saw a hatred so pure and crystalline it sent a chill down her spine. Michael chose a pew in the middle of the church, as he always did. They had barely sat down when Beatrice stood up noisily, making sure everyone heard the scrape of wood. Lords, Constance and Gloria followed her like obedient ducklings, moving to a pew far away, at the very front. The sound echoed through the silent church. Some women have no shame. Beatrice's voice wasn't exactly a whisper, but it was loud enough for half the church to hear. Abandoned by her husband, and already shacking up in another man's house, and pregnant no less. What a lack of decency. Eleanor felt her face burn. She wanted to get up and run, but Sophia was holding her hand, looking confused by the adults. Michael sat rigid beside her, his jaw tight. Mrs. Rose placed a protective hand on Elena's shoulder. "Ignore them," the housekeeper whispered. "A snake's tongue can't kill someone who has God in their heart." But ignoring it became impossible when the priest began his sermon. Father Edmund was a man in his 60s, always kind, always fair, but today his words seemed targeted, poisoned. "We live in difficult times, my brothers and sisters," he said, looking directly where Michael and Elena were sitting. "Times where good customs are forgotten, where Christian morality is cast aside in the name of conveniences. The family is sacred. Marriage is sacred. And we must always remember that in the eyes of God, certain situations, certain cohabitations can be seen as sinful if they are not within the holy bonds of matrimony." Elena felt the tears burn. All around them people began to stare openly, some shaking their heads in disapproval. Michael was so tense he looked like he might break. When the mass ended, the humiliation continued. Women who used to greet Michael now averted their gaze. Men who did business with him made excuses to avoid stopping to talk. Morgana, Beatrice's daughter, walked past them with her nose in the air, whispering something to her friends that made them laugh maliciously. "Michael," Elena whispered when they finally reached the truck. Sophia was already asleep, exhausted from the morning. "I can't do this to you. I can't destroy your reputation." "My reputation will survive," he answered, but his voice was strained. "It won't." Elena felt the tears finally fall. "You heard the priest. You heard those women. You are a good, honest, respected man. And I'm the abandoned pregnant woman staining your name just by being near." Michael didn't answer the entire way back. The silence in the truck was heavy, suffocating. When they arrived at the farm, he finally spoke. "Do you think I care what those vipers think of me?" "You should care," Elena cried openly now. "You live here, you do business with these people, and I'm a nobody, nothing. I'm not worth losing everything for." Michael turned to face her with an intensity that made her hold her breath. "You're nothing. Elena, you brought life back to this house. Sophia makes me smile again. Mrs. Rose is happy for the first time in years, and you—" He stopped, as if the words were too big to say. "You remind me that I'm still alive. If this story is affecting you, please leave a like. What would you have done in Elena's place? Would you stay knowing you could destroy the life of the person who saved you?" But the situation worsened far too quickly. 2 days later, a social worker showed up at the farm with an investigation warrant. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint with Child Services, alleging that Sophia was in an inappropriate and morally questionable environment, living with an unmarried man with no blood relation. The woman inspected the entire house, asked invasive questions, and looked at Eleanor as if she were a criminal. Sophia cried, frightened through the entire visit. "I will have to open an investigative file," the social worker said as she left, her voice impersonal and cold. "Until this is resolved, the minor's situation is under judicial supervision." Eleanor fell apart after the woman left. Mrs. Rose found her in the bedroom, clutching a finally asleep Sophia, sobbing quietly so as not to wake her. "It was her," Eleanor said between tears. "It was that woman from the church, Beatrice. She wants to destroy me." "She won't succeed." Mrs. Rose held Eleanor's face in her hands. "Listen to me, child. God did not bring you this far just to see you destroyed. There is a purpose in all of this. You must have faith." But Elena's faith was shaken. That night, after everyone was asleep, she packed the few clothes she had brought. She was leaving. She had to leave. It didn't matter where, it didn't matter how. And she couldn't do this to Michael. She couldn't risk losing Sophia to the state. She was at the door with her bag when Michael appeared in the hallway, still in his work clothes. "Where do you think you're going?" "Away." Elena couldn't look at him. "I have to go before I ruin everything. Before they take Sophia from me because of my mistake." Michael crossed the hall in 3 long strides and gripped her shoulders, firm but gentle. "You're not going anywhere. I've already lost one family. I will not lose another." Eleanor finally looked at him, saw the fierce determination in his eyes, but also saw fear, the same fear she felt. "Michael, they'll destroy you. They'll take Sophia from me. And I can't take any more pain. I can't take any more loss." "Then don't lose," he said. And for the first time in 6 years, Michael Travers made a purely emotional, purely impulsive decision. "Marry me." The world stopped. Elena stared at him, unable to process the words. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, his hands still on her shoulders. "Officially. In the church. In front of everyone. Then they can't say anything. Sophia will have a father. You will have legal protection. And His voice faltered for a second. "I won't be alone again." "Michael, you don't have to do this. You don't love me. You barely know me." "I know you're good," he said simply. "I know you love your daughter more than your own life. I know you work hard and don't ask for anything you haven't earned. And I know that when you smile, even though it's rare, something inside me wakes up again." He paused. "It's not storybook love, but it's real. It's what I have to offer." Eleanor felt something break inside her chest, not from pain, but from a relief so intense it nearly brought her down. It wasn't the grand, romantic love from books, but it was real. It was honest. It was a good man offering protection and a true home. And maybe, just maybe, it could grow into love over time. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I accept." But neither of them saw the shadow that moved away from the living room window. where Morgana had heard everything. And when she told her mother the next day about the planned marriage, Beatrice was silent for exactly 5 seconds before she picked up the phone. She had friends in high places. She knew people who owed her husband, the police chief, favors, and she would not hesitate to use every single one of those connections to stop that wedding, even if it meant destroying Elena Carter completely. But it was that very night that Sophia relapsed. The fever returned with a violence that frightened even Dr. Mason. Sophia had improved so much in recent weeks that everyone had let their guard down. But the pneumonia had one last attack saved. 104 degrees. The thermometer read 104 and wouldn't budge, no matter how much medicine they gave, no matter how many cold compresses they applied. Eleanor did not leave her side, not to eat, not to sleep. She just held her daughter's small, hot hand, whispering prayers so desperate they barely made sense. Michael brought pillows and blankets, staying there too. First in the chair beside them, then kneeling on the floor with Elena as the night wore on, and nothing changed. She was getting better, Eleanor repeated between sobs. She was doing so well. Why is God doing this? Why is he taking her from me? Mrs. Rose entered the room at 3 in the morning, carrying tea that no one drank. She saw the two of them there kneeling, the child delirious in the bed, and felt her heart break. But she was a woman of faith, older and deeper than any despair. So she knelt too, her old joints protesting, and began to pray aloud. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Michael and Elena joined the prayer, their voices muffled by tears and fear. They stayed there, the three of them, praying in a circle around Sophia's bed as the merciless dawn approached. Eleanor felt life slipping through her fingers, felt she was losing her daughter, and the pain was so great she could barely breathe. Please, she whispered, when the memorized prayers ran out. Lord, I know I've sinned. I know I deserve punishment, but not her. Sophia has done nothing. She is pure and good and doesn't deserve this. Her voice broke completely. Take me, take my life, take everything, but let my little girl live. Please, please. Michael took Elena's hand, squeezed it hard. He had no words, but he had presence. He had his own pain mirrored in hers, and somehow that was enough to keep her from shattering completely. When the clock struck 5 in the morning, something changed. Sophia stopped tossing. She grew so still that Elena cried out, thinking the worst. But then she saw the girl's chest rise and fall, slow but steady. She placed her hand on Sophia's forehead. The skin was cool, not hot. Cool. Michael, she whispered, her voice trembling. The fever broke. Dr. Mason arrived at 6, mentally preparing to deliver bad news. He found Sophia sleeping deeply, her breathing regular, her temperature normal. He examined the girl 3 times, checked his stethoscope, and measured her temperature again. It made no medical sense. It made no sense at all. The old doctor took off his glasses and cleaned them, as if he needed to see more clearly. I have no explanation for this. Last night she was on the verge of death. And now, he looked at the 3 exhausted adults, saw the faith shining in their tired eyes, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: reverence. I brought the medicine. But whoever cured this girl, it was God. Elena's tears were different now, not of despair, but of gratitude so profound it ached in her chest. She knelt right there and gave thanks, the words pouring out in an incoherent flow of joy and relief. Michael joined her, and for the first time in 6 years, he wept openly, not from grief, but from something that looked like hope. The news of the miracle spread through town before breakfast. In small towns, news like that travels at the speed of light, especially when it involves the people everyone was already talking about. By 9 in the morning, half the town knew that the seamstress's daughter, living with Farmer Travers, had been miraculously cured after everyone prayed through the night. Beatrice heard the news with a rage that made her tremble. She was losing control of the narrative, and that was unacceptable. She had to act fast before this miracle story turned Elena into a saint in the town's eyes. That's when she made her fatal mistake. That afternoon, Beatrice went to her husband, the police chief's office, and demanded he take care of Sophia's investigation. She wanted the child removed from Michael's house immediately, wanted Elena declared an unfit mother. Chief Vance, usually submissive to his wife's desires, hesitated this time. Beatrice, there's no legal basis for this. The house is suitable, the child is well cared for. And now with the planned marriage. There will be no marriage. Beatrice cut him off, her voice dangerously low. You will stop it. How? I can't just... You can and you will. She leaned over the desk. Or do you think I don't know about your meetings with Rosanna at the motel on the highway? Do you think I don't have proof? The chief turned pale. Just then, the office door burst open and Morgana entered, her face red with tears and anger. Enough, mother, shouted the 23-year-old, her voice echoing down the hall. Enough of this madness. Beatrice spun around, stunned. Morgana, get out of here. This is not your concern. It is. Morgana was trembling, but there was a determination in her eyes her mother had never seen. I know what you did. I know everything. The payment you made to Elena's husband to abandon her. The lies you forced me to tell, the false report you filed using Dad's letterhead. Everything. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Beatrice went white. You don't know what you're talking about. I do. Morgana pulled an envelope from her purse and threw it on the desk. I found the receipts, I found the letters. I found it all hidden in your closet. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to tell. I'm going to tell everyone what you did to that innocent woman. Morgana, I did this for you. This. Beatrice practically shrieked. So you could marry Michael, have a good life. I don't want to marry Michael, Morgana screamed back. I never did. You were the one with this obsession. I love John, the mechanic, remember? The one you said wasn't good enough for me. The tears were flowing freely now. You destroyed an innocent woman's life because of your own fantasy, and I won't be silent. Not anymore. And Morgana wasn't. That same day, she went to the church at the time she knew it would be full for evening mass. She walked up to the altar, an act that shocked everyone, and told them everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every calculated cruelty of her mother. She showed the documents, the proof, the receipts. She told them how Beatrice had paid Elena's husband to abandon her, offering him enough money to start a new life in another state. She told them about the false report to child services, about the pressure on the priest to deliver that sermon. The church was in absolute silence. Father Edmund, who days earlier had given the condemning sermon, was pale with horror at the realization he had been manipulated. The women who followed Beatrice, Lourdes, Constance, Gloria, looked at the floor, ashamed to have been complicit even without knowing the full story. I told those lies because my mother made me, Morgana cried openly. I said I saw inappropriate behavior at Michael's farm, but it was all a lie. The truth is, Elena Carter is an honest woman who was destroyed by jealousy and malice, and I can't carry this on my conscience any longer. When Morgana stepped down from the altar, trembling with fear and relief, the priest was waiting for her, but not with anger, with tears in his eyes. My child, he said softly, you have just done the bravest thing I have ever seen anyone do in this church, and the most Christian. The congregation erupted in murmurs. Beatrice, who had entered the church expecting a normal mass, was met with looks of disgust and disappointment from everyone. She tried to leave discreetly, but people moved away from her as if she were contagious. Lourdes, Constance, and Gloria followed her to the door, no longer as allies, but to make it clear they wanted no further association with her. Chief Vance, upon discovering his wife had used his position and threatened his job to persecute an innocent, requested an immediate transfer. He could no longer look the citizens he was supposed to protect in the eye. The shame was too great. Father Edmund called a special mass 2 days later. The church was packed. Everyone wanted to see what would happen. Michael and Eleanor sat in the back row, still processing everything that had been revealed. Sophia, completely recovered, played quietly beside her mother. The priest ascended the altar, his expression grave. My brothers and sisters, he began, his voice heavy, I have made a grave mistake. I allowed poison to enter my heart and my words. I judged without knowing the truth. I condemned without investigating the facts. He looked directly at Michael and Eleanor. And for that, I publicly ask forgiveness from Michael Travers and Elena Carter. I ask you to forgive me for using this sacred pulpit to spread judgment instead of love. The church was utterly silent. The priest stepped down from the altar and walked to where they were sitting. He knelt in front of Elena, who was too shocked to react. "Will you forgive me, my child, for doubting your honor?" Elena could barely speak through her tears. She helped the elderly priest to his feet and hugged him. "You are already forgiven, Father. You are forgiven." What happened next, no one planned. One by one, the people in the congregation began to stand and applaud. The applause grew, echoing off the ancient church walls, and transformed into something bigger, a collective redemption, an acknowledgement of error, an apology from an entire town. Michael and Elena were married 3 months later, in a simple but moving ceremony in the same church where they had been humiliated. Sophia was the flower girl, beaming with pride in the white dress Mrs. Rose had sewn especially for her. The church was full. The entire town wanted to witness the union, to show support, to be part of the redemption. When the priest asked if they took each other, the answers were loaded with genuine emotion. It was no longer just a marriage of convenience. In the last few months, between caring for Sophia, the late-night conversations, the small gestures of kindness, something real had grown between them. It might not have been the passionate love of fairy tales, but it was true love, the kind built on a foundation of respect, admiration, and daily choice. Beatrice watched from a distance, from the very back pew alone. No one sat near her. Morgana was at the front, next to John, the mechanic she had always loved, and they held hands openly. When Elena and Michael walked out of the church as husband and wife, Beatrice felt the crushing weight of all she had lost to pride and ambition. 5 years passed in the blink of an eye. St. Helens Farm prospered more than ever. Michael, transformed by love and family, had become a man known for his generosity. He expanded the farm, but also created a program that employed single mothers from the region, offering decent wages and childcare. Eleanor, now 37, assisted expectant mothers in need, free of charge. She had turned one of the large rooms in the house into a sewing workshop, where she taught the craft to women who needed financial independence. She sewed complete layettes for those who couldn't afford them, and her reputation for kindness spread to 3 neighboring towns. Sophia, now 9, was a healthy, cheerful girl who played in the garden with her twin siblings, Peter and Anna, named for those who were lost. The laughter of the 3 children echoed across the property, filling every corner that once breathed death and silence with life. Mrs. Rose, retired but living in a comfortable cottage Michael had built for her on the property, spent her days telling stories to her adopted grandchildren, repeating the same phrase. God writes straight with crooked lines. What man tried to destroy, the Lord turned into a blessing. One Sunday afternoon, 5 years after the wedding, there was a knock at the farmhouse door. Elena answered it and found Beatrice standing there, aged, hunched, her eyes red from recent crying. "I have no right to be here," the woman said, her voice broken, "but I had to ask for forgiveness, for real. Not just with words, but by looking you in the eye and telling you I know the harm I caused. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I have to ask anyway." Eleanor was silent for a moment. She could close the door. She had every right to send this woman away. But then she thought of everything she had been through, of how God had rescued her from rock bottom, of how the forgiveness she had received had transformed her, and she knew what she had to do. "Come in, Beatrice," she said softly, opening the door wider. "You should meet the babies. Peter and Anna are at the age where they'll make friends with anyone." Beatrice wept right there on the doorstep, the tears of a woman who finally understood what she had lost to pride. Eleanor hugged her, and in that embrace, there was liberation for both of them, one from guilt, the other from resentment. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Michael found Elena in the garden, looking at the stars. He sat down next to her, took her hand, a gesture that had become natural over the years. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. "About how strange life is," Elena smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. 5 years ago, I was starving in a shack, alone, desperate, thinking God had abandoned me. And today," she looked at the lit-up house where her 3 children slept safe and loved. "Today, I have everything. It wasn't us who found each other," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "It was God who put us in each other's path. I was dead. You were dying. And he used us to bring each other back to life." Eleanor thought about that, about all she had suffered, all the tears she'd shed, all the nights of desperate prayer, and she understood something fundamental. Nothing had been in vain. Every pain had a purpose. Every tear had watered the soil from which joy would grow. "When you open your heart to help someone," Michael said, repeating the words that had become a mantra between them, "you're the one who ends up being saved. I didn't save you, Elena. You rescued me from a living death." "I think we saved each other," Elena replied, lacing her fingers with his. "With God's help." And there, under the starry sky, two hearts that had been shattered and mended beat in unison, living proof that God never abandons his children, even when the path is too dark to see. Sometimes you have to break completely to be rebuilt even stronger. Sometimes the greatest blessing comes disguised as the worst tragedy. And always, always love has the power to redeem even the deepest pain. Sophia appeared at the door, sleepy, looking for her mother. Eleanor called to her, and the girl ran to snuggle between them. Michael wrapped his arms around them both, his heart so full it almost hurt. And as the stars shone above, the family that was born from despair and strengthened by trial simply existed, peaceful, grateful, and whole. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how many storms you face. It doesn't matter how many times you fall. What matters is that you get up, that you choose faith when everything calls for despair, that you open your heart even when it's broken. Because it's right there, in the most difficult moment, that God works his greatest miracles. And Elena Carter, the one who arrived barefoot and desperate at a farmhouse gate, now knew that better than anyone.